Right, thank you very much, Humphrey. I may have to swap glasses at some point. I'm not sure which set of glasses are going to work here. So also, Humphrey has asked me to keep my remarks to 10 minutes, so just so you all know, I'm giving him permission to interrupt me and tell me if I'm going on too long. Okay, so that's, I'm not, so just, it's all right with me.
So that you can all ask questions and you can speak more.
Anyway, I want to begin by thanking, as always, the UPF for inviting me and congratulate them on this timely and important initiative. Thanks to Robin, Margaret and the team for always chasing me and not leaving me alone. I want to commend and appreciate in particular Mother Moon for her leadership to this work, representing her tireless devotion to the cause of peace despite her advanced age. Now, in my view, and I've been through it several times, the Seoul Declaration is a document of great wisdom. It's no doubt a product of much dialogue and discussion, of magnanimity, of a search for peace, and a willingness to compromise and a determination to seek a constructive way forward. We could do with a bit more of that around the place, couldn't we? Now, the press attention to the conference that adopted this declaration, such as it was, I don't think there was much in the mainstream Western news media, nothing new there, but I'm thinking of like the South Korean news agency Yonhap and the South Korean English language media. Their focus, when they reported it, was overwhelmingly on the presence and the participation of people, mainly from like the right wing of the Republican Party in the USA, figures like former Vice President Mike Pence. And it's quite normal that they should focus on that. It was extremely important and a good thing that they were there. But I think that at least equal, but of at least equal importance, but less noted, is the active participation and leadership in this work and the conference itself of the Cambodian Prime Minister, Samdech Hun Sen. Now, Cambodia may be a small country, but in the Korean context, it's a very important country. Cambodia's relationship with the DPRK goes back many decades. It goes back to when Kim Il-sung and Sihanouk both visited Indonesia in 1965 and were introduced to each other by the late President Sukarno and became friends. So the relationship with the DPRK is something that's important to Hun Sen. And of course, the South Korean presence and investment in Cambodia is also important to him. But those relations with the DPRK, perhaps ironically, are even more important to the royal family in Cambodia. And Cambodia is a constitutional monarchy, and Hun Sen and his government have not only close ties to the DPRK, but also to such key players as China, Russia and Vietnam, which of course was the site of the second summit between Kim Jong-un and President Trump. And Cambodia is this year's chair of the 10-member Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, which contains some of the most dynamic economies in the world and of course a few of the most not so dynamic. So that I think indicates the sweep of the Seoul conference, and that feeds into this declaration and its importance. I think this balance reflects the inclusivity and universality of UPF, and that's reflected in the declaration. Unlike many other global peace bodies, the UPF and its associated organizations genuinely try to reach out to all stakeholders, and that is something that I personally very much appreciate. The Seoul Declaration is a short and succinct document. You can read it in, I guess, 2 minutes, and you've all been given copies today if you hadn't read it before. But for such a short document, it's extremely comprehensive and it has a profound content. If even half of what it calls for were to start to be seriously implemented, then I think the prospects for peace and security in the Korean Peninsula and the surrounding region would be immeasurably enhanced. The 3 opening points analyze, I think, the essence of the problem perfectly. These are the 3 points. The first one begins recognizing, the second one is acknowledging, the third one is believing. And the first one makes the very important point that there is, and my fellow Keith also referred to this, that there is still the Korean War finished in 1953, but there's still no peace treaty, just an armistice. And that armistice divided, or codified, if you like, the division of a once unified peninsula, and not just a peninsula, of a nation, a people with the same language, the same culture, and so on. And this is and this was not the supposed outcome of World War II. This is not what the Korean people who resisted Japanese colonialism, from whatever political ideology they were, and they were various, but it was not what they were struggling for. The second point acknowledges the terrible loss of human life and the bitter legacy that leaves. Just as, again, Keith said, how the US Civil War ended in 1865, but some of its consequences are still with us. So that's reflected there. And thirdly, the third point there refers to the wider significance of the peaceful reunification of the Korean Peninsula. I want now to look at some of the points on which the participants were resolved, where they begins, one, urge the two Koreas. And the first one I want to pick up on is point one, which begins, urge the two Koreas and the international community, and so on. You can look there. But basically, what's important, what I see that's important here is the issues of bilateral and multilateral diplomacy, combining the two, not being prescriptive and being flexible and inclusive, avoiding military confrontations, increasing mutual understanding and confidence, and working towards what's known as CVID, comprehensive, verifiable, and irreversible disarmament. And if time allows, that's the bit where I'd like to get a bit controversial and speak about, but I don't think I'm going to get time. The second point I want to stress here is the call for constructive dialogue. This is in point 2 of the calls, is the need for constructive dialogue with mutual respect and acknowledgement of each other's security interests and concerns. I think this is important because too often the security interests and concerns of the DPRK are not acknowledged, and this is something that of late China has repeatedly pointed this out, and that's also a new significance because China is of sufficient weight in the world that if they're pointing it out as a concern, it needs to be noted. This also refers very importantly to the shared cultural heritage, and this is so important. Koreans are one people, and they demonstrate this whenever they can, when they've been able to, the reception they give when they've been able to field joint sports teams, for example. The presence of North Korea at the Winter Olympics when they were held in South Korea and the sensation that made. The family reunions, and Humphrey talked in his opening remarks about the tragedy of the divided families. The people-to-people exchanges when they are allowed to take place. The songs Arirang and Our Wish is Reunification resonate equally in both parts of Korea, and they are sung in particular whenever people from the north and south are able to meet in third countries. Point 3 of these items refers to confidence-building measures and trust-building programs. Again, this is so important. We've had more than 70 years of division and estrangement to break down. And this process needs to be as gradual, patient, and incremental, not by a big bang or all or nothing scenarios. Point 5 here refers to the demilitarized zone. And here I think is an example of how do you turn a bad thing into a good thing? How do you plant the seeds of hope in the fields of despair? And there are examples, for example, when the company Hyundai Asan were responsible for the Kumgangsan Special Tourist Economic Zone in North Korea. That was something that was possible. I personally crossed the DMZ from South Korea into North Korea, to travel from Seoul to stay in Kumgangsang at that time. And one of the most moving things was the importance it was for elderly people, very old people from South Korea, to make what might be the last journey of their life, to visit those beautiful and sacred mountains which are so intrinsic to Korean history and culture and to the Korean soul. Also, around the DMZ, we can point out that it is a possible venue for inter-Korean exchanges, but also for international peace and cultural activities. The possibility has been mooted of a global peace park in the demilitarized zone, but it would have to be done in a sustainable way, which is my next point here. Because we live in a fragile world. We live, as we know now, with the threat of climate catastrophe, of threats to biodiversity and the ecosystem. There's a need for sustainability and for rewilding. The DMZ has become a wildlife sanctuary over the last decades. And there is a possibility here to promote sustainability and harmony between people and nature. Next, on point 6, deals with tourism, sports, culture and education and the promotion of them in the DPRK and beyond. Again, this is really important. Those points have been chosen so well. First of all, because there can be no lasting progress without touching people's hearts. Now, the issue of United Nations Security Council sanctions on the DPRK can't be avoided forever. But actually, and I imagine this might be why they were chosen, these are 4 very important areas that are actually examples of things that are permitted even under the present UN Security Council sanctions. Much of this also applies to the points made in point 8, although attention would need to be paid to the economic and infrastructure issues. Point 13, I believe, is vitally important. It refers to the prosperity and economic feasibility of reunification and of the right to development and livelihood and well-being of the people of the DPRK. And Keith Best talked about some of the scissors gap there between the North and South. I'd just like to point out, to put Keith's points in some perspective, that the DPRK is widely reckoned to have something like 3 trillion worth of precious raw materials sitting under its soil. So this is, a real economic cooperation is not necessarily a one-way street. But in terms of what the declaration is calling for here, it has to be measured against UN Security Council sanctions, but one can carefully explore what can be done even under the present situation within these sanctions. For example, by applying for relevant humanitarian and any other exemptions, as China and to a degree Russia have also begun to call for, as well as the possibility of rollbacks of sanctions in exchange for moves or restraints by the DPRK in the direction of disarmament.
May I prompt you?
Yes, okay, so I would...
Give us a wrap.
Okay, I'm going to finish then with one point, if I may, and that is a thought, and I think both Humphrey and Keith have talked obviously about the situation around Taiwan at the moment, and other issues have been touched on. Now here's just a thought to leave you with. It is always rightly said that the situation on the Korean Peninsula poses a threat to the peace and stability of the entire Asia-Pacific region and indeed the world. But let's stand this on its head for a moment. If we can achieve peace, reunification and reconciliation on the Korean Peninsula with all the goodwill, trust and confidence-building measures that this will require, will this not constitute a massive contribution to peace, stability and security in the region and the world? With the continued crisis over US House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan, this is a topical and urgent consideration. Following the end of Japanese colonial rule, it was the US placing of its 7th Fleet in the Taiwan Straits in the context of China's entry into the Korean War that created the division of Taiwan and the mainland. Korea continues to be a key issue in global politics. Thanks.
Thank you, Keith. Stay there. I have a question.